So I'm not, I'm speaking. This is my session, so I did an introduction this morning, so I don't think we need to worry about that. I am curious though, good morning, what you were hoping for when you came? Yes. Good, all right, cool. Nice to know. So what I want to talk to you about today, and I love the sessions this morning because you're going to see references to a number of those topics in here. What I want to spend time with is helping you understand and actually go away and be able to, do this if it appeals to you, using a concept that came out of Harvard Business School. It's called strategy mapping. Now, strategy mapping has a couple of benefits. Number one, and the biggest one let me jump in. But it's one that I use when my last job before in structure. My CRO recruited me here because it's my third time working for him, which tells you he's either a great leader or I'm an idiot. I'll let you decide. But I was at Vonage. So Siobhan and I were competitors, right? Frenemies, anyway. And this was something that our SVP of operations told me about. I wasn't familiar with the concept. And I remember, Mark, who's Mark Fellows, I think he's working towards his fourth or fifth successful exit. So smart guy. And he said, look, this is written for enterprises, but I think there's something there if you want to go read through it and figure out how does it apply to sales enablement. And I'll save you that time because it is they're big books. I mean, these are you can find them on Amazon. They're not technically textbooks, but they feel an awful lot like textbooks. So I was intrigued. And I plowed through that book, and it was not an easy read. And what I want to do is share with you what I learned, what we implemented at Vonage, and what my team and I are living at Instructure. Because it came to Instructure, I got a chance to build from scratch again and do it from the start. So these are some of these challenges that you've seen people, or some of you have asked questions, have been up here talking about. And the one that jumps out to me is that minus or less than 20%. Now that's a couple years old from CSO Insights, but I'll bet it's not a lot higher. That 20% of people that responded to their survey were able to measure their success in enablement with KPIs and tying them specifically back to corporate initiatives. So my hope here today is show you a method that has worked very well for me with two teams on how to do that. I think I covered some of these. This was written for enterprises. The case studies in the book, if I recall, are Mobile Exxon and Home Depot, etc. But in the book, they talk about the concept of a shared service unit. And I was like, aha, when I read that, shared service unit. That feels more like sales enablement, all right? And our customers are our customers on the outside, and we have our customers on the inside, so let's do with that. The key is, let me ask you, how many of you have sat in a strategy rollout meeting at some point in your career, maybe more than once, and 6 months later, nobody could tell you the strategy? It's pretty common. So the other thing I learned as I was investigating this concept is, this is how you make strategy sticky. Because when we show you how you walk through, how you tie it to events, you tie it to revenue, you tie it to corporate initiatives, and you're then using a balanced scorecard that measures what you have in your strategy. So we'll jump into it. All right, come on. Oh, helps to hit the go button, not the laser. So a few of these are things that you heard mentioned this morning, right? How many times did you hear measuring? Measuring what matters, identifying and measuring. That came up a bunch of times, I lost track. Eli talked about leading indicators and drivers. It may have come up in some other sessions. One of the other ones that I noticed this morning, aligns the strategy with team members on a day-to-day basis. But a couple that I didn't hear directly brought up and want to call out, especially is the one on the far right, improves communication of the impact to the organization's vision and strategy. That is one of the early successes I saw with this. I think we'd all agree that helping executives outside of the sales org understand what enablement does can be very challenging. They think training, they think butts and seats, they think any number of things. I consciously don't use the word training as much as possible. When I was new in enablement, one of the early authors and thinkers that I stumbled upon was Rod Jefferson. I don't know how many of you know Rod Jefferson or have seen his thing. And one of the things I saw him say is, you train animals, you enable humans. And that really struck me. So I don't use it a lot. But when I'm talking to executives outside, my boss happens to get enablement, right? That's why I'm working for him. But finance has to understand enablement. HR has to frankly understand enablement because we're not integrated with them in the same way that some of you are. And there's other executives that need to understand that. And I found that many of them, at some point, if they were in business school, whether it was first degree, second degree, they've heard of this at least. And when I walk you through it, I want you to try to put on your non-enablement and even revenue lens and see if you agree with me that this is something that really you think would resonate with your executives. So let's get into, hey, I just noticed my timer's not running, so I don't know how long I've gone, but hey, I get 30 minutes, all right. So I'm going to get into the meat of the methodology. Kaplan and Norton, strategy-focused organization. If you want to go dig into 300 and 400 pages of stuff, not nearly as good as like 300, 400 pages of Harry Potter, but have at it. You start at the top with financial. The first lens you've got to look through is financial stewardship. We heard a lot of that conversation this morning. If we cannot tie, only sellers generate revenue. But we've got to be able to show a reasonable correlation back to that revenue. I think everybody would agree. Again, we had a few different ways that was being discussed this morning. So this mapping concept starts with that. What are the financial performance indicators or measures that in our case, would be your revenue leader, mine happens to be a CRO, that they care most about? Now, the authors suggest no more than 3, because organizations often make that mistake, and generally you can't do more than 3 things very well at one time. So you'll see the power of 3 show up a lot in this. So what are your top 3 things, right? Then we've got 3 ways we're looking at our strategy and what we're going to deliver. The customer view, internal business process, and organizational capacity. And let me just start to break, right? So I think the financial speaks for itself. Now, when we're talking about the customer, it's a little different if we're this internal shared service unit. I know I've got my slides here. I guess I'm just so used to... Anyway, but our internal, what do they require from us? What do they need from us? And I believe that our customers are also our customers that are buying, and we need to be thinking about that. But what do our customers, and what are we doing to provide those needs? Internal business processes. You've got to be good at what you do. You've got to deliver. You've got to be on time. You have to have consistency and excellence, feedback loops, all of those things. Think of all those internal business processes that you need to satisfy your internals. And then finally, learning and growth. Somebody, again, came up this morning. Who's enabling the enablers? How are you keeping, use Stephen Covey's, keeping your saw sharp, right? How are we doing it? So those are the lenses that we look through with this particular. Now, again, here we got the power of 3. The revenue, because the revenue drops out, that's at the top of the map. Everything's going to map up to that. Now the authors recommend that you find one. You're going to focus on all 3 of these, but you have to pick one as your differentiator. How are you setting yourself apart with your customers internally? In our case, being internally, you have to pick one. So a product-led strategy, I think, probably speaks for itself. Customer intimacy, building strong bonds with customers, and that operational excellence. There's 3 of those. 2 of them are table stakes, right? You can't not do any of these things. But one of them is your differentiator. It's how you're going to really make a name for your enablement program within the halls of your company, the executive suite especially. So you choose one as a differentiator. I talked a little bit already. You already need to start off with your corporate department or team vision, and that's where your charter comes in, right? So set aside, we've identified these financials, financial goals, we need to then make sure we have a well-defined team vision and a mission statement. And I don't use those interchangeably. I'll show you. We're going to actually walk through building a map. But if you don't have those, you may have your ladder up against the wrong wall, and you won't know until you get to the top of it. So revenue focus first, then work with your team to develop that mission and that strategy. If you're an army of one and you haven't hired a team yet, then start off with yours for now. I found an interesting exercise. We had all our team together for an offsite in Moab, Utah last November. And I was looking at our team mission statement, and I realized I wrote that when I got here in like December of 2019. And here we were sitting in a team of now 19 people, a year and a half later, with so much had changed, but the mission statement had not ever been revisited. So I called an audible, and we actually set aside one of our plan sessions, and we spent the afternoon crafting a new mission statement as a team. It was powerful. It was really good, a good exercise. So you might need to freshen that up. The corporate strategic objectives, we've talked about that. For us, it's going to be about revenue, at least, I believe, almost all the time. Now you're going to start to analyze what factors. When you think factors, what elements of your enablement program are going to enable the teams to achieve that success. I'm going to jump in and show you how it looks, just to make sure we've got time. I'll just take my own questions. So we start off, and hopefully you can read this fairly well. So I took some of the stuff, I took some stuff out that was sensitive information, but I'm sharing with you the one we actually built at Vonage. All right, so our mission was Vonage has the highest sales productivity per head in our industry. Sorry, Siobhan, but I'm not there. Yeah, I want to be there. Well, now that Ericsson bought them, who knows, right? But all right. So now vision is a little bit different. We want to deliver the methodology, knowledge, skills, and tools to enable Vonage sellers and partners to differentiate by how they sell. When I think about sales enablement at the highest level, I believe that's what we need to do. We need to equip our sellers to differentiate through the experience, through having a frictionless sales process for the customer. Our products look a lot like our competitors' products to our customer. We know they're special, but you have to earn the right to have that conversation for a customer to start to see it, and it starts with SDRs and marketing and that exceptional experience. So that's why we want to differentiate that way. Now we get into the financial perspectives. These happen to be the ones that we talked through and settled on with our CRO. They probably don't change a lot in some companies, but increase the average contract value, in case you don't use that acronym where you work. We wanted an increased mix of products. We'd acquired a contact center as a service company out of the UK. We had acquired a number of other companies, and our reps were still selling the stuff that they'd been selling for 5 years. So we really needed to work on that. And some of the numbers Eli threw up this morning, we had probably more like an 83-17 split in the number of sales, 17% driving the revenue. So that 83% really needed to come along. So these are the three lenses that I shared on the other slide. Customer intimacy, product, and operational excellence. Remember, two are table stakes, got to deliver them consistently. One is a differentiator. As a team, we settled on customer intimacy as the differentiator because we felt in our roles, if we don't have that customer intimacy, then we can't do our jobs. If we haven't invested in that relationship, then we're talking heads. That's assuming they show up at all. So that's what we decided to do as a team. May not be right for your program. The next, that doesn't show up very well, does it? What that one says is then we've got the customer perspective. These should all look familiar from the previous slides. The internal perspective, what do we need to do to fulfill and exceed our customers' expectations? And organizational capacity, how will we sharpen our saw and sustain and continuously improve? So you've got the 3 across the top, the 3 down the side. Told you lots of 3s in this particular methodology. Now you're ready to start doing this. So the first thing, the first set of arrows are tying together. Those are the 3 revenue indicators that we believe are going to increase sales productivity, which ties directly back to our mission. Now I'm ready to start thinking deeply about what is in my enablement program. And I'll tell you, this is really the tricky part. This is kind of like a Rubik's Cube for a couple of reasons, and it won't come easy. I'll just go ahead and bring them all on here. These are elements of our sales enablement strategy. A lot of them are elements of my sales enablement strategy my team and I are executing right now. But I think most of them should make sense and be recognizable, but I want to not assume that. Anybody have a question just on one of those bubbles?
Question here.
Yeah.
Jason, remind people to sell these are 3% of sales rep participation.
That's at the top, right. So percentage of reps that are at or over quota. Yeah, like I said, we were at about an 83-17 split on who was, and it was like a 17 doing the revenue. So.
When you say innovate relentless, what do you mean?
This is why I loved, I can't remember his name, Craig, that Einstein story this morning. Because from our customer's perspective, every time there's an acquisition, and we were in active acquisition mode the whole time I was there. Anytime there's an acquisition, anytime a new competitor comes on the scene or comes on strong, right? Somebody we didn't used to worry about all of a sudden is a tier one nipping on our heels. There's all sorts of things changing in the seller's world. And so what that is tying back to is kind of that Einstein thing. We got to go back and rethink and innovate, right? What made sense last year may not make sense now. New technology may allow us to deliver it more effectively. We can do more asynchronous or more pre-work, things like that. So the key here, and this is what makes these tricky to build, every one of those elements of my program had to tie back to one or more revenue targets at the top. Every one of them ties back. So just a lot of thinking, moving things around. You see here that I didn't feel like, for example, oh, I must have done this for an international audience. I just noticed analyze. Anyway, that something like anticipate, analyze, prioritize needs by route to market, I felt like straddled to. That's okay. I mean, this is your map. Things don't have to neatly fit in a box. And once you've had this built, this should be your blueprint for 18 to 24 months. This is not, right? So again, when you're building this, you need to really be thinking high level and what you're going to build and go execute on that's going to have the most impact. Now I'm going to show you how to measure it in a minute. But any questions on the map itself before I show you the scorecard? This is what a scorecard would look like. Now you should recognize most of the elements here. Financial perspective, here's your increased sales productivity. Customer perspective, these are all bubbles on the map that we brought over. Internal process, learning and growth, same thing. These just came straight over from the map. Now we get to start thinking about what are we going to do this quarter, this half, whatever measurement makes sense for you to drive those. Again, this is why strategy can start to get sticky. So, if we're talking about increasing sales rep, well, actually, let me start with one like this. Gain trusted advisor status. What can we do now? What's our measurement? Sarah's going to show you something really cool when she comes up here that she shared with me just the other day. In fact, I thought it was so cool, I asked her to come to my next full squad meeting so that she could share with the rest of my team. But that's a really thing right now. That's one way she's going to show you. How do you gain trusted advice? How do you measure that? But you got to have you got to have a measurement, and you've got to have a target. Without data, it's only your opinion. And so you've got to establish that. And again, these take time to really think through and build. This is not an afternoon process. It's somewhat iterative, at least for my brain. What's my measure? What's my target? And then out here is, what are we doing, again, this week, this quarter, this month, to drive that measurement closer to the target? Now, these may be things that you don't accomplish in 1 month or 1 quarter. They may fall over into another. Nothing wrong with that, as long as you're seeing consistent improvement towards your target. Some things are just difficult. Some things take a lot of change management. They just take time. From a methodology perspective, that's okay. The fact is, you're tracking it. You're thinking frequently about what should these initiatives be over here to continue driving that number or measurement upward. Questions on the scorecard? And what I really want you to be able to take away is how it ties directly back to this. Because when I wanted to go 2 years ago, it was end of 20, I went and pitched my boss on 2 expensive pieces of tech. I mean, I think the total spend was probably $450. And for a company our size, I mean, we're okay size, we're publicly traded, but it's a lot of money. And what I did, my whole presentation to him was, I sat down and said, okay, for platform A, these are the elements of my strategy map that it's going to impact, and here's how it's going to impact those things. Platform B, same thing. And because he'd agreed that those are the financial drivers, and he'd agreed with me at the very beginning that these elements literally would tie back up to those if executed correctly, it was a much easier conversation. I was more than meeting him where he was. Right? So Frank, right, we all agreed on this, so the spend will impact that, which we all agreed will impact the revenue. So that's another benefit I found this methodology. It makes those conversations, I won't say easier, money never comes easily, but it equips your executives with the ability to go ask for that money more effectively. And they can visualize how what you're getting is going to impact that. And then of course you want to measure that. The last thing, I just threw this in here because it is sometimes helpful to publish an executive dashboard that just reflects the data using something like Smartsheets, Workfront, that you can then have that out there. And you're just populating that again every quarter so the executive team can see where you're trending. You're being very transparent, right? If things slip into yellow, acknowledge it, own it, explain why and what you're going to do about it. But just an idea that I haven't done this yet at Instructure, mostly because we have Smartsheets, but I'm not sure that I want to use that again. But I communicate it in QBRs, executive briefings, my team's out communicating it, but we have all agreed we want to get to that. So last thing, some pitfalls to avoid. Number 1, take the time to develop a well-defined strategy because you're hanging everything on this. There's so much execution in those bubbles. And lots of folks talked about that this morning. You're going to hear lots more about that. So think of what I'm talking about this is your superstructure, right? For 1.5 to 2 years. Make sure that everything in there ties back up. Otherwise, again, it falls apart. It doesn't make sense. Don't do it in a bubble. Iterate with your CRO. Iterate with finance. Iterate, whoever makes sense in your organization. Let them get some skin in the development of this early on, and there's really no surprises once it's developed and everybody's aligned to it. Somebody talked this morning about vanity metrics. Who was that? Okay, vanity metrics. Avoid vanity metrics. They are not going to help you here because if you're not measuring the critical things, if you're not putting the things in that scorecard that you really believe you can do this month, this year, this quarter, to drive that, then don't measure it, right? It just doesn't make sense. The other thing that they advise against, beware of self-serving managers. So yes, iterate, but don't put junk in there again because it's going to make a manager look good, but it doesn't necessarily drive any of the things that we've been talking about. So those are just some of the tips. And I actually have not run into that problem in the 2 places I've done this for what it's worth, but it's one that they call out in the book. Questions at this point? We have about 4 minutes. Yeah, Eli.
Just observation, and this is great work. And, in the spirit of 16,000 people are new, this is advanced enablement process work here. And if you're starting this book small, you can write a book just on this. And,
yeah, Kaplan and Norton might have something to say about that, but I think you're right.
This is really good foundational work
Mm-hmm.
for folks to think about doing, and so I wanted to comment on that.
Thank you. And my recommendation is if you don't have something like this, start to have the conversations and start to get it in place because if you're on a fiscal year, we're moving into budget cycles coming up pretty soon for next year, and it's an ideal opportunity to get your executives thinking with you this way. Brett.
Yeah, so one thing I think Paul also should emphasize is on that scorecard screen, he how are we gonna measure that? Now, how are we gonna measure that? And after we ask the third or fourth time, we go, okay, I don't know, or this is how we're gonna measure it. So it just made our team conversation so much more aligned.
Thanks, Brett. Any other questions or thoughts? Thank you. So you can find me on LinkedIn. You can find me around here at the reception tonight. I love teaching.